Want to drive faster? Listen in as Kinch Rendell, an SCCA National Trophy winner and multi-time Pro Solo champion himself, interviews the best autocrossers in the land. He talks fast and drives even faster. And now here's your host, Kinch Rendell.
Today's show features Tom O'Gorman. We are going to figure out, at least I'm going to really try to figure out why he's so fast. Why is he an alien in all these different cars? Little clue, he had a lot of practice at quite a young age. But what was he practicing? How was he figuring it out? What was he learning? Championships. In addition to being 2013 Driver of the Year, he's your 2016 National Champion in FP, 2013 FP National Champion, 2013 Triad winner, 2 national championships, and 5 trophies in the 7 national appearances. He's also Pro Solo champion, class champion in 2013 and 2012, in 2013 in the S4 class in the Chevy Corvette, 2012 was the STS Honda Civic CRX SI. Road racing this past year, he's the 2016 TCB champion of Pirelli World Challenge, the Drivers' Championship. He's fast. He's taken what he's learned from autocross, adapted that for the track. He also breaks down the differences, what made him faster on autocross, and what he has to tweak when he gets back on the track. And get this, he's driving these higher horsepower cars now, and yet he just won a championship on the track in a front-wheel drive car. So once again, he can hop in all these different cars and very quickly figure it out. I love the insights. I love the talk about video games. I hope you get a lot out of this. Let us know what you think. Enjoy. Today we have Tom O'Gorman with us. Tom, welcome to the show.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for the time. Start off with what got you into autocrossing. When did you start this?
I actually got into autocross when I was 15 and a half. It was 2007. My cousin, Sean O'Gorman, who you may know, was already autocrossing for a couple of years, so we were aware of what it was. We'd seen it before, but my dad had just bought a 99 Miata. And as you do when you buy a Miata for the first time, you go take it autocrossing. So my dad started actually when I was 14, and as soon as I turned 15 and got my temporary license, 2 weeks later I was at a autocross co-driving with him. So that was my start.
All you guys that start young, and on top of that, a Miata. I was told so many years later. Of course, the first time I go with my Civic or a Civic, and I'm blown away by 10 seconds by Miatas. I'm like, what is that? And then I learned that's what you're supposed to start racing in, and yet I've still never.
Right. Yep. The answer is always Miata, right?
I've been threatening my current co-driver that forget the Porsche. We're going to drive a Miata this next year. He's having nothing to do with it.
Right. Yeah. He's probably thinking, what? Why?
So before you ever autocross, give us your background on what else you've done from video games to go-karting. I think that's a rumor out there that you go-karted a ton or something.
Actually, I would say video games were definitely my start. I've legitimately only ever owned racing games, and from the time I was 6 or 7, Gran Turismo came out on the original PlayStation. That was my first game, and then Gran Turismo 2 came out, and that was like my pinnacle. Even to today, I love playing Gran Turismo 2, like on my laptop with an emulator. So started with the basic console games, pretty arcadey stuff, but by the time I would say 12, 13, I discovered some of the computer games that were more simulators. Actually found a steering wheel, plugged it into the computer, and started to race a little bit. And about that time also was when online gaming was becoming pretty accessible through the consoles. So I was starting to race online, and I found some leagues, and I was doing that pretty intensely. Like I'd rush home from school and get off the bus and come race online with people from 3 in the afternoon to 10 at night or whatever, until my mom made me go to bed. And so I think that was really my main start between the simulators and racing online with people. I was learning a lot, as much as you can learn through arcade style and simulator style video games. I was learning all that before I even got in a car. The go-karting actually came a little bit later. I had started autocrossing, and my dad decided that he wanted to stop working in corporate America, work for himself, and opened an indoor go-kart track. That was in 2011. So we'd been autocrossing for 4 or 5 years at that point, and that was just like a cherry on top of being able to practice in karts.
Nice. So
you had a little bit of that mixed in, but you said even after autocrossing. Take us back to what you think you can or we can these days get out of racing with a steering wheel and pedals. Yesterday I plugged them in for the first time ever and did Forza. And after a few races, I finally got to where the wheel gives you feedback these days that I could keep the Miata from spinning. I mean, I did crash it plenty of times. What could we hope to get out of that?
I really think there's a lot to be said learning to drive on visuals because when you're driving in a game, you're obviously not able to react to the feeling of the car, and there's a little bit that you can get through the force feedback in the wheel, but you're really reacting 99% on what you're seeing on the screen. So you're learning constantly as you get better at the games where you should be looking. You get better at reacting to the dynamics of the car on the screen, if that makes sense. It kind of depends on what view you like to use, but I actually started with the chase cam view so I could see the car and I could see what the car was doing, and I kind of learned from those visual cues. And I actually had a really good conversation with Glenn McGee, who was an iRacing guy that won a championship in iRacing and is now a driver in the MX-5 Cup actual pro series. And he actually said on top of that, it helps with consistency, which I had never really thought about. But you learn to be so much more consistent because you're driving off those visual cues and you're not reacting to the feeling of the car. So I think that is a huge portion of it too. You learn some consistency, but you also learn to react to things much more quickly because you're reacting visually and not off the seat of your pants.
No, very good point. I'm so glad I happened to play last night because I would notice like, oh, my camera angle's changing here. You need to change your steering input. Mm-hmm. I did notice, and this relates back to something I told somebody at Pro Solo, I think even Forza told me, hey, listen to the tires. And that is something that why I like the Bridgestones more this past couple of years. I could hear them talking more. So I would even give credit, I guess, to these video games that if you're hearing the tires, that's another sensory you can take in from a video game.
Absolutely. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that either, but that's a really good point.
Yeah, that's... And I can't get over the fact that the steering wheel, I plug it in and it turns to the left and it turns away to the right. My kid's like, what's going on? I'm like, I guess it's calibrating. The amount of feedback it gives, I'm kind of like wishing my real steering wheel felt like that.
Well, yeah. You get this huge amount of feedback from it. Some of the cars, especially newer cars, you get no feel at all.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I was going to almost ask, and we'll get into how many cars or the cars you've driven. The new drive-by-wire probably smooths it out more than gives you input back.
Oh, yeah, on new cars for sure. And some new cars even have the steering ratio changes, like as you speed up and slow down. And it's active like steering ratio, which is also very strange to react to. I don't know that I've ever driven a car that I could say I noticed that in, but you definitely feel the lighter steer or the lighter feel through the steering wheel on a lot of newer cars, which is why I just love the older cars, just pure, no driver aids, anything like that. That's my favorite.
Gotta love those 89 Civics. So, So you mentioned that. I got in an E-stock back on the Hoosier days, Miata, expecting to have all this great feel. No power steering. I was just hanging onto the wheel, just yanking it. It was a small, tight course. I thought, there's no way I can feel anything. I'm just hold on for dear life, muscling this wheel around. Do I have the wrong story on Miatas compared to like what you've driven and what you started with?
Well, we started on street tires. It was in '99. I guess it was always pretty light feel really with that car. But I do remember the first time it was an STS car, so it wasn't on Hoosiers, but it was set up pretty well and no power steering, and it blew me away. Like you said, just hanging on for dear life, muscling this car around the course, and it was like physically exhausting to drive that car for just like a 60-second run. So I guess now that I think about it, yes, if you got a car with no power steering, Miata with no power steering, you get an arm workout more than a feel through the wheel.
Okay, so the power steering ones are better for this true feel that I was so like expecting I would have.
Yeah, I would say so.
So take us back to video games, and did you play with or learn much on setup?
I can't say that I did originally. I would say the big thing that I learned originally is, I was a kid, so I had a small attention span, and I wanted to drive every car and every track, like in every sitting. So I was constantly switching everything up, and always trying stuff new. So I learned, I think, my quick learning curve came from there. I can get in a car now and usually figure it out pretty quickly. I still have a lot to learn on car setup, I would say. When I started to get into the actual simulators on the PC, I started to learn a little bit better, but there aren't a ton of games that really are awesome for teaching you car setup, or I didn't learn car setup well through them. One of the two.
Oh, okay. Now that's somebody else local here. They'd say, oh yeah, everything I learned from iRacing, even on setup. And I went to Forza last night. I was like, oh, it's wet. I hate this wet course that they make you do. Can I bump up the tire pressures is what reading some article told me you should do so you don't hydroplane as well. I had no clue if the game knew that or if it would react that way, but I was wondering, like, would I at least start learning by watching, oh, when I do this, I get faster or slower on its simulation?
What I've actually learned is most games you kind of have to play the system a little bit. You kind of have to work the physics engine in the game, and each game has its own kind of cheats that you can do. So, like the current Gran Turismo game, the less camber you put in the car, the more grip you have, which makes no sense, but that's just how the current Gran Turismo works. And each little game has its things like that. So you almost have to learn how the setups of the game want to work, not how the setups of real life work. And they're kind of connected loosely. But if you want to set a car up to be fast in the game, you don't necessarily go with real life theories always.
Okay, good point. Yeah, so that's something at this point, you just go to the search engine, you type in hacks or something, and now I know, surely that's why I sucked last night.
Exactly, yeah, you need to get the NOS cheat codes.
Exactly, be like, why are these other Miatas outrunning me? Well, as soon as we turned, I knew why, because I couldn't figure out how. Once again, visually, I was thinking to my kid, I'm like, it's so much easier in a real car. Like, there's no way, I was in a newer Civic on the wet course, there's no way I'd run off the course this many times. Of course, I'm not used to tracking that speed, but I was thinking, wow. So I can see myself sticking with it. I will learn something, probably from the visuals, about how fast I'm really going on this track, or to look more at the number signs about braking zones and such.
Yep. It also teaches you marks, because this is it's not as applicable to autocross, but if you're learning video games, driving on track, you pick marks and you work off those marks and things like that.
Exactly. My 7-year-old even asked about that. I go, oh, that tells us when to brake. I would not have noticed them, except luckily he asked. I'm like, oh, yes, I should look at those.
Total autocross mindset, right?
Yeah. Same thing. Yeah, why would I look at that? I keep trying to look. I'm like, how far can I look down? And I'm like,
I'm just looking at the corner.
Yeah, I'm not even turning my head. I'm like, I should be turning my head. This is a bad habit.
It's interesting you bring that up, actually. I've found, and we could, like, as you said, we'll start talking about autocross kind of theories. I am not great at turning my head, and I've decided it's because I learned on these screens where I had a limited field of vision, and I am able to move my eyes really easily. I drive with my eyes a lot, and I'm really great at long, straight transitional elements where I can look all the way through them, but I'm not great at turning my head, so I think that's where that comes from.
Good point. It's funny you bring that up, because I was speaking with somebody, Kevin, here locally, and he said that's one reason he doesn't think he turns his head is because he's played so much iRacing. Mm-hmm. He doesn't have to.
Yep. That's the only theory I can think of.
I didn't even think to ask James Yam. He said he's terrible at looking ahead. Brian Peters always beats up him on that. I'm like, I would have thought you could never be fast and not look ahead. He's like, no, I just walked the course 10 times. I kind of know. I'm like, wow, I'm the opposite. I want to walk at 0 and I'm faster because I look ahead more.
Yep.
I still am hoping I can challenge myself to use what I don't do at all. Like, oh, I can memorize this course and be faster. I'm still kind of the opposite. I want to come back to, you said you drove every car and every track possible. It seems like in autocross land, you can jump in every car possible and go fast. What are your thoughts there?
I really think that those things are connected, and I think that's also tied into maybe some of the visual on the video games that we were talking about, learning to be consistent quickly. I've also been lucky enough to get the chance to drive a lot of different things in autocross, but I've always found it to be pretty natural to jump into a new car and within a first couple of turns of the wheel have a pretty good feel for what it's going to do. And I guess I can't say exactly where that comes from. I don't know exactly where that comes from, but I think a lot of it has to do with driving so many different things constantly in the video games and learning to react to different things and understanding the dynamics of front wheel drive versus rear wheel drive and all those different elements that go into it. Even though it's not perfect in a video game, you can learn a lot from that.
Yeah, no, I'm as soon as you say you don't know why, I'm almost coming back to that visual. As soon as the car starts sliding, or do you know if on these video games, does the steering radius of the wheel change based on the car you're driving?
Yeah, the newer ones, yes, a lot of them do.
Because that would make you have to adapt within a few turns of what the heck's going on.
Mm-hmm.
You really have to pay attention, especially if you're hopping car to car. Okay, look, this one I can't turn. Like every time I'd get in the S2000 out of a Civic, I would yank the wheel and bad things would happen.
Mm-hmm. I love those cars for that. Quick steering.
Yeah, and I guess if I was to do that enough, be it on video games and or in real life, I would pay more attention. I wouldn't just be programmed to yank the wheel the way I want to in the Civic, because I'd have to go, what's going to happen? So maybe I'd be paying more attention every time. And maybe that's something that's just ingrained in you at this point.
It could be, yeah. I think those are all tied together for sure.
Yeah, I'm just like, I'm going to figure this out for you. We're going to know what makes you tick, buddy.
Yeah, this isn't even a podcast anymore. It's like an intervention.
Exactly. We'll help you go faster or help you think
like
too much about this.
Session.
Yeah. Now you know. No, this is helping everybody else. We hope it doesn't mess you up. It makes you faster as well.
No, actually, I found. So I was lucky also to start instructing very early in my autocrossing, and I was not. So when I started, it was very much a like throw everything at the wall, see what sticks. And I would have great days, and I'd have so-so days, and I'd have days that I hit a ton of cones and days that I didn't, and it was just kind of a crapshoot what I was going to get. And this is like within the first year and a half, and I think I was either 17 or 18, so it was within the first 2 or 3 years that I started autocrossing that Mike Johnson had me come instruct an Evo school, and that was really the first instructing experience that I had. But I did a couple of them that year, and learning to verbalize what I wanted the student to work on helped me infinitely improve my own consistency, my own driving, my strategy. I actually had a plan going into runs, and I understood why I was doing things that I was doing just by learning to verbalize to somebody else what I was having them try. So that was the most valuable thing from getting my start. Learning to instruct people helped me.
Yeah, I've heard that over and over from business to autocross. Once you coach somebody, you're really having to figure out what the heck am I trying to get them to do.
Exactly.
And probably saying it maybe in 2 or 3 different ways so different people can take it in and assimilate it.
Yep, every person interprets it differently too. So you've got to learn to say it different ways, learn to give examples. Yeah.
What are some of the biggest things you remember or still at this point are teaching people, beginners or?
Right now, the one that I instruct the most, and I love instructing because it's just a phenomenal program, is the SCCA starting line schools. And it's really not necessarily just for autocross, but it's supposed to be a performance driving school that just you start on an oval in the morning and a slalom in the morning. So you learn brake, turn, gas in one element, and you learn transitional in the other element. And it's just so broken down that you don't have a lot going on, so you can learn a lot really quickly because it's very repeatable. It's very easy to understand what we're working on. And the thing that I love teaching is because you always hear every region has their coach or their novice coach or whatever, and they always talk look ahead. But I love teaching what you're looking ahead for and why, rather than just say look ahead, because if you can learn to identify what you're looking for and why you're looking for those things, you really get a lot more out of it than just thinking I need to be looking up further ahead. So I love teaching that aspect of it, finding the exits of the corners, finding the next entry point, and those key cones that we always talk about, learning how to digest a course to boil it down to those key cones, and then learning how to find them. I love that aspect of starting line especially.
So how much of that can you verbalize on why we're looking ahead?
Well, you always want to know where you're going. And I love saying that once you're where you are, you can't change where you are right now. If you're into a corner, you either made the corner or you didn't, and there's nothing you can do about it now. So what's next? So I try to boil every course down to just what's the exit of this element. And I've always found that I can visualize linking elements together pretty well. And I notice some people think about each element differently as each individual piece of the course rather than a course as a whole. And I like to think of a course as a whole, just finding the exit points of the corners, the critical exit points. So I always try to find those exit points where I'm trying to carry as much speed out to the next thing, and then where sacrificing the speed makes sense too.
That makes total sense. I try to tell people the exits matter when you can use the speed, or I guess in some cases the exits matter when you have to shut it down for the next element. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah, definitely.
So in that coaching, did you take many classes to begin with those first couple of years?
No, I took one school. To this day, I've only taken one school. And actually, coming from playing video games on road courses all the time, I used to drive very road coursey on autocross courses. So very wide entries, cut down to the apex, try to carry as much speed as possible using a lot of distance. And the one school that I did, my instructor was Scott Bourne out of Kentucky. And he rode with me on one run. It was a huge lot. It was like a 75-second course. I think I was running 74s. And I had a 97 Civic. It was stock. It was just a good learning car. And he rode with me the one run and said, "You're using a ton of extra distance. You're carrying huge road course lines. Try just driving at the apex cones rather than sweep down to them." It's like, okay, interesting. So I tried that, and I cut 4 seconds off. It was 74 down to 70 immediately, one run. And it was like, oh, okay, I get this. And from that point on, it was always cut distance, cut distance, cut distance. And every once in a while, I forget to do that, and you like realize, oh, I haven't been doing that, and you can cut a bunch of time out. But that was the one school that I've taken, and have always applied that to everything since then.
Nice. And I'm going to try to get us to see if we can articulate this for a visual. You were making the nice sweepy, so you're probably sweeping out wide to set up to turn in.
Mm-hmm.
And what does your arc look like now when you just aim at the apex cone?
I would say that my arcs are, I tend to brake pretty early, and I try to straighten the course out as much as possible. They're usually much more of a V shape in a longer sweeper than a U, if that makes sense. Let me think about that. Does that help answer it?
Oh, exactly. No, that's exactly what I was wondering is instead of making one, let's say big arc, you are even sweeping out to set up the arc and then going all the way out on the exit just because you could, because on a road course, there's red and white little rumble strips that tell you, hey, drive over here.
Exactly.
And you're really just cutting. And I like also something I relate back to Brian Peters. You seem to be focused on the exits a ton. When it comes to the entry, are you straight line braking? Do you even care about the entry, or are you just looking for that exit?
I'm always just focused on the exit. Like I said, I tend to brake pretty early, so my entry speeds tend to be pretty low. I like to have the car under full control to get on power as soon as possible and power out, and all I'm worried about is hitting that exit mark. So I've always had the first time we ran data, actually, comparing to the co-driver was taking a much wider entry, carrying a lot more entry speed, but I was always making up that speed by saving some distance, and then by getting on throttle so early, I was also carrying more speed out, so I was faster on entry and exit, even though my speeds weren't always the fastest. Yeah,
so you were giving up at the beginning, which once again comes back to several people, that if anything, you made sure you're probably on the gas much earlier because you're done with braking, and if you could start accelerating back to the optimal speed for the turn, you got back to it.
Exactly. And it always sets you up for the next thing because autocross corners come so quick. You're always set up better for the next corner, too. If you're still chasing the car exiting a corner and you missed your mark, it throws you off for the next couple of elements, too. So I'm always just focused on those exit points so that I can be prepared for the next element, too.
So it's a double whammy in autocross land because so often the next feature's right there.
Yep, exactly.
So you miss your mark on the exit, which puts you on the wrong line or not the optimal line for the next section.
Yep, and you've lost time in that section.
Yes, yeah. Oh, I can brake really late. Oops, I pushed out and there went half a second, plus something in the next. Do you change this when you get on the track? Is it something mentally you do differently, or you just know that, okay, I can be wide and swoopy here?
I actually tend to struggle a little bit on road courses. I tend to pinch entries now. So it's actually, I do have to make a conscious adjustment to, I can turn in later, I can carry more speed. And it always comes back to road courses. The next corner is almost never right there. You have a bunch of time where you need to let the car accelerate down a long straight. So I have to readjust my strategy when I go onto road courses versus autocrosses.
Okay, that's interesting. Because I've heard, and let's get into this, how much do you think autocrossing first is advantageous before road racing?
I say it can't hurt you. I know, like I just said, it can teach you a couple of things that maybe don't work, but the level of car control that autocross forces you to have, reaction skills to what's happening underneath you with the car, the ability to read a new course is huge. I've driven 5 new road courses this year that I had never driven before and felt at home on the second lap, just because it's ingrained in me to learn courses quickly through autocross. Those would be definitely the 2 big things that it can help with. It also helps in a mindset of what you're used to. You're used to having to deliver immediately right away. So you have a kind of a perfectionist mindset of hitting your marks every single time, consistency, and attacking. And it actually makes road racing, road course driving feel easier because things are happening more slowly, but you also have lots of chances at it. Whereas autocross, you get 3 runs to 6 runs in a day, and then the course is totally different. You got to start from square one. So I think when you're mentally prepared for autocrosses, becoming prepared for road course driving becomes easier.
Yeah, good. Thanks for the insight there. With data, how much data in autocross land have you taken to begin with, and do you still take data and compare it with anybody?
I find data very challenging with autocross. I've had it with a couple of co-drivers, and they've had benefits from it, and I've gotten a couple of insights here and there from it, but I actually get a lot more out of data with road courses than I do in autocross. And
so take us through on the road course. Do you compare your practice sessions? Do you look at it afterwards? What's it helping you with?
Yeah, exactly. I take a whole session and I look at it afterwards, and I can break it down for corner by corner or sector by sector and see what's working, because you get a chance to try a bunch of different things all back to back, and then you compare those things together. With autocross, obviously, you're comparing one run at a time. So I can see the most beneficial that data has been for me in autocross application is when you have a co-driver to compare it to. You take your first runs, you compare them back to back, you figure out who did what better, who could carry more speed where, who could make a line adjustment here or there, and then you can both try that. If you're running by yourself, it's very challenging to do a run. You can look at it, but you're not really learning anything. And then you take another run, you can compare them. I think data really is based in comparisons rather than, you can't just look at a run of data, one run, and say and learn anything from it, because there's nothing to compare it to.
Oh, totally agree. That's where the co-drivers help out so much. You're both autocrossing, road racing, and have done go-karting. So when it comes to a car, which foot are you using for brakes?
I always right foot brake in a car.
And how many turbo cars have you driven really fast right foot braking?
Quite a few. Panda, the Street Mod 240 from the New England area. I drove that car quite a bit. I've driven a bunch of Evos in the last couple of years also. I've never really had an issue in boosted cars with right foot braking.
I love it. I love challenging my own assumptions, and I realize I should do that all the time. That's always been my excuse. I started left foot braking because of a turbo car, and I swear it's got to be helpful there. But something tells me, if we get in one of these cars, you're not going to left foot brake, and you're going to beat me, or it's going to make no difference.
Right. Yeah, I totally am in the mindset of whatever you're comfortable doing is what you're going to be fast doing. I would actually love to challenge myself to take an entire day and learn to left foot brake. And what's really interesting here, this is something in a video game with two pedals next to each other, I left foot brake. But in real life, I right foot brake. I have no idea why, and I've never really given myself the opportunity to left foot brake in real life because I've just always right foot braked. But yeah, it's a total enigma to me why that is. But I have never had a true compelling argument of it's faster to do one or the other. I know people who can do both. I do one. Plenty of people who have been just as quick or quicker than me do the other. And plenty of people who left foot brake I'm quicker than. It's just whatever you're comfortable with.
Yep. That's one thing I remembered playing the video games last night. I only have two pedals, no clutch pedal. I'm totally left foot braking, but it's starting to hurt my foot. I'm like, wow, I don't want to hold over this pedal.
Right, yeah.
But I've been telling myself you have to learn a lift. You always left foot brake. You don't just lift. So in the little Miata, I would lift and it would start rotating. I'm like, wow, I might really be able to pick up this technique without going on the street or waiting for autocrosses. Here we go. I can drive on the track, lift on this turn. I'll get rotated and get back on the gas, open the wheel. So I saw that, if nothing else, I'm like, here's my chance to really figure this out, because this year I didn't execute that very much. At a test and tune course there in Lincoln, I did a few times for a run, but I'm so ingrained that my left foot just goes over there. And it's always dragging or doing whatever it does. And
I was going to ask if you've ever had issues with over braking because your left foot's dragging on the pedal.
People definitely at times are like, you're braking. I'm like, no, I'm not. I know Jason Frank, I'll bring him into this. He left foot brakes. I'll be like, oh, your brakes. Oh, he goes, yeah, sometimes I drag. I will tell you one assumption I had that everybody should pay attention to driving a Porsche. I go, man, that second run, I must be left foot braking and dragging because it cut the throttle. It made that funny noise. Came back in the third run after focusing. It was traction control. I left it on.
Oh, dope.
Yeah. So I told him, I was like, it's not that bad. He goes, oh, it's terrible. I'm like, well, I'm running decent times with it. At least I was once again hearing what the car was doing. It took me till I got back to go, did I drag my foot? I tried to blame myself, my assumption, yeah, you were dragging your foot, and it doesn't like that. So, yeah, how often are us left foot breakers, unless we have lots of data, do we know that we're over braking? I doubt we know.
I guess it's a potential, but I'm always I think it still boils down to what your driving style is and how you get the car to do what it needs to do.
Yep. And that's what's so amazing in autocross. Some people have said, although it sounds like you've hopped in lots of cars, that depending on the setup, one style works better than another. And at least my belief of your driving, you can get in these cars and you drive them to their max of whatever that is. You can feel that, figure it out visually or feelings, and get there regardless if it's a left foot braker's car to begin with.
Sure. Actually, whatever you said something that reminded me. I was going to ask if you've ever, if you're the kind of person that adjusts the car or you're driving first.
I also am not a setup person, if I can throw you in with me. I don't know a ton about setup. I don't even know to tweak on a car. So I just drive it however it is. Sure.
I am the same way. So that's whatever you said led me to believe that would be your answer. I've always been the first to blame whatever I'm doing to be the issue before the car, which I've had to learn as I've started to drive more modified cars. I would say that everything I've driven since pretty much 2013 has been closer to a race car than a street car in autocross. And there's so much more adjustability that it's to a point that there's nothing I can do about it with my driving, but I still blame my driving first.
And that's one thing, not adjusting cars. I'm glad I was in stock for the first 7 years or so, because I could do tire pressures in the rear of the Integra, or I could dare tweak shocks, but I didn't do that. And I pretty much said, okay, I have an Integra just like these other people. Can I compete? So it really did always come back to me and what can I try or do differently to improve my driving without jacking with the car pretty much ever.
Yep.
And I don't, that's an assumption I have. So as people take that and deal with it or don't try it, just realize if you at least get a car or get in a car that's competitive with somebody, you can find out really quickly how much of your driving is different than theirs or is lacking from them or better than them.
Yep. And my most challenging students are the ones that are trying to learn setup and driving in the same window. I am a big believer that you've got to be able to run. If you're doing a test and tune and you're working on the car, you start the day by setting, if you can run the same time 3 times in a row, if you can run on the same 10th or 2, 3 runs in a row without making big mistakes, really figure out what the car's doing and dial your driving in to as good as it's going to be for that day, and then start making changes. Because if you're trying to do learning the course, learning the car, learning the XYZ, and then also make adjustments, it's such a crapshoot as to what's really happening. I mean, it could be something you tried, it could be something you changed on the car. So many moving variables. You got to dial in the driving first.
That's a great point. It reminds me of what somebody said, that why adjust after the first run? If your tires were cold to begin with, it may be quite a bit different by the second run.
Yep.
So as you go tweak, and then somebody else saying, sometimes we just fake an adjustment for the co-driver just to make them think that, yeah, it's going to be stickier now.
Right.
Yeah, so how much of it mentally can you convince yourself, okay, I can clean up this mistake or that mistake, and yet realizing, especially if you're newer, any one turn you can blow half a second just if you push too hard. Mm-hmm. If you heard the tires go rup too much, that can be a ton of time. No need to go back there and probably tweak.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And it's always been, especially co-driving with as many people, it's interesting to see who reacts to, if they don't have, if they come off a single run and they want to make quick changes and they adjust even multiple things. And I'm always thinking, I don't know, I'm just going to drive the car. So my answer is do what you would do for yourself. I'll let them change the car, do whatever they need to do. But I'm with you. Drive the car first. If you really got to make changes after you hit a wall, then go for it. But yeah, make your adjustments with your driving.
Yeah, I love that. And your point of being consistent. Can you run consistently over and over? At that point, especially on a test day, you know the course. You didn't have any major mistakes, let's say, for 3 runs in a row. Change something, and I like what David Whitener said, change it drastically to see if you can tell a difference.
Oh, yeah, make big changes, too. On a test day. If you're trying to learn and figure out what's going to work for the car and what's going to happen when you adjust this or turn that knob, make them big, not small. So they're really exaggerated changes. We were running an STS CRX. Do you still have your Civic?
I do.
Gotcha. So identical basically to your Civic. And I think we added something like 15 pounds of pressure to the rear one day. And it made absolutely no difference at all. And these run the 195 Toyos that everybody used to run. And we're thinking, okay, we're throwing these huge changes at this car and nothing's happening. So we were learning in that big changes even don't really make all that much of a difference when you have certain cars. Yeah,
certain cars, that soft of a tire. Yeah. And that's where some of these people in minis, as well as back in the Integra days, they'll get up to 60 and 70 pounds of pressure in the rear of these cars, especially stock, before they get it to where they're saying it's loose. So at times, I still do this. If it's cold, the first run, I'm going to let out 2 or 3 pounds of pressure. It's probably all mental. Because like you're saying, it's just, that's where people are playing these ranges, and people are like, oh, you can run that low on the Bridgestones? I'm like, because I did it in the Toyos, sometimes I tried it on the Bridgestones. Really? I'm like, yeah, sure.
Why not?
Once again, unless you can feel a difference or you notice some bad tire wear, try it. And that's where the shocks, I keep telling myself, it's been several years now, I'm going to make shock adjustments and see if I can tell a difference. Mm-hmm. And after these interviews now, I'm like, wow, when I make it, I should make a whole, from one extreme to the other almost, to just see. Because only one car ever have I made a shock adjustment and said, wow, that fixed the braking. It actually stops now.
Right.
Does this apply to track as well? When you make testing changes, are you changing big things or little things?
Everything that I've ever done on road courses has been in the first car that I bought from Jinx Jordan. It was a 91 Civic, 1.5 4-speed, just like the base Civic from 91. And it had been a race car forever at that point. And when I bought it, he said, don't touch it. It is perfect. Don't turn a knob. Don't do anything. Just maintain it the way that it is, and it'll be fast at every track you go to. And of course, when Jinx Jordan says that, you listen. So I listened, and I never touched it. So that was good because I was learning too many other things at that point. That was my first road race car. Second cars that I've had have been B-spec cars, which are non-adjustable shocks, non-adjustable spring rates, camber limited, ride height limited, And the only thing you can really play with are tire pressure, ride height to a certain point, and alignment, usually only in the front. So you have a very small number of changes that you can make. So when we're making the changes, we usually go pretty drastic because they're soft and squishy cars that big changes don't really hurt them much. So we'll go from 40 pounds to 50 pounds of pressure, and the change is small enough that it's not that big of a deal. So I guess my experience isn't wide enough to speak really importantly, but we do tend to make pretty big changes when we need to.
Yeah, I'm sitting there cringing when you can't tow out the rear.
No. Nope. Well, actually, that was the big thing. The car that I went from last year to this year, we can. And that was like the big selling point for the car that we got this year. So you can actually get – my car last year had an 1/8 inch toe in all the time, and there was nothing we could do about it. And it was a big headache.
Be like, let's put 80 pounds in the rear. Let's try 95.
Yeah. Exactly.
Oh, and Jinx Jordan, you need to build cars for me because I love to buy cars that are ready to go. You and me, we're buddies already. I can tell. And that's another thing. I can go back to that Integra. I didn't buy the one from David Falth, but when I got one, I said, what shocks, what settings, and ran those. We did a test day, and they were changing them, and I didn't know what they changed. It was, you're faster on that one by 1/10. Eventually at Nationals, go back to the settings I'd run on the whole time. Mental, probably it was just a mental thing that felt good. Okay, it's back to what I've been driving on all year. Coming back to your coaching, what do you get out of riding along with people? The verbalization, so you're able to learn what you want them to do and teach that to them. Are you also getting anything on just riding with them?
I definitely learn some car dynamics depending on who you're riding with. It really depends. When I'm instructing, especially now with like the starting line schools, things like that, you're riding with people who are new enough that you're focused on what they need to be working on, and I don't necessarily think I learn a whole lot from seeing them drive, but we actually had a really cool opportunity this year at a school the day after. It was Craig Wilcox out of Kansas City and John Hunter out of Lincoln and myself were the three instructors, and we all drove Craig's STX Mini together, and we all rode with each other all day too. So we were really comparing and contrasting our different driving styles, and we had the timing going so we could figure out exactly who was doing what better, and we weren't running data, but we were coaching each other all day. And it was fascinating to ride with those guys too, because all three of us had different driving styles. And we came out, I think Craig and I were within hundredths, and John was still within 1/10 of that. So we were all within about 1/10. And all of us driving differently, doing different things better than one another, and like critiquing the heck out of one another. That was like a huge learning day for sure.
Yeah, that's something I'm geeking out on is, and you've already gave me some ideas about what we can do, an oval to start with, a slalom, but just have a day, get a smaller group of people together and just go over and over again. The couple of times I did that this past year were amazing, having other great drivers around and getting in and feeling what they were doing and seeing the styles. Break down your style versus Craig's style, or all three styles. Break down for us what in your mind was different, what you perceive was different with them.
Sure. Like I said earlier, my style is very much braking early, and I don't use a ton of brake pressure. One of the things that I've really learned and worked on this year, and maybe in the last 2 years, is using the pedals of the car as pitch control as well as speed control. So you're balancing the dynamics of the car on each four corners with the pedals, not just with the steering wheel. So I try to keep the car pretty balanced under braking. I don't use a ton of brake pressure, and I brake pretty early. And I try to use the release of the brake pedal to force a large rotation on turn-in. I really like a car that turns in hard. And then I kind of figure out whatever I need to do mid-corner, focusing on that exit point like we were talking about, trying to get to throttle as early as possible and on to the next element as quick as possible. So my lift and brake points tend to be pretty early, in addition to my throttle points being pretty early with late apexes. So everything's kind of backed up a little bit. Craig was the exact opposite. He charges hard into the corners. He gets the car turned after he gets the car charged into the corner, and then tries to power out. So he's carrying much more entry speed and mid-corner speed than I am. And John was kind of somewhere in the middle. Craig and I both have a lot of experience in the front-wheel drive stuff, and I think John was more adjusting to the car than we were that day. So he got there over the 5 runs, but he was really taking cues off of both of us, what each of us were doing, and applying both of it, and got to the exact same 10th that we were on. But it's always interesting. I think another person that I've really watched a lot is Nick Barbado. He's New England too. I don't know if you've met him. He also has a very fast entry speed and fast mid-corner speed. Really balances the car in the middle of the corner and is generally pretty late to throttle, but he manages to get such high entry and mid-corner speed that it doesn't matter. So I try to pull those different things from watching different people, listening to people's throttle and brake inputs and things to figure out what works best.
That's fascinating. I love it. That's, once again, you're in the same exact car, so it's a spec setup. You guys notice the total differences on a front-wheel drive car. I suspect I'm much more like Craig Wilcox. And for a couple of years, I decided I'm braking too late. I got to start braking earlier. Wrong assumption, I can say, long story short. But because I didn't know how to do the other parts that you're doing, I was just slower. I mean, I wasn't terribly slower, but I could tell I just wasn't where I used to be. And it's interesting to hear you say you brake probably earlier and softer as compared to, I was told by David Fouth, you should feel the anti-lock brakes in this Integra every time you push the pedal down.
Sure.
So it's so interesting. I think I am like Craig, that I brake late, and trying to brake earlier. I've realized, at least in autocross racing, if you change one thing because somebody tells you, you might then need to change something else to get the full effect of improvement. So for Craig to become more like you, he would have to not only brake sooner, but then get on the gas sooner. And something that's interesting, let's break down. You said you come off of the brake pedal to get the car to rotate. So you're coming off the brake pedal hard?
No, I tend to be pretty progressive in releasing the pedal, and I'm trying to keep the weight on the nose of the car. As I start to turn the wheel, I'm bleeding off the brake pedal kind of at the same rate, so that the car goes straight from having the weight transferred forward to out to the outside without really ever shocking the system. Shocking the tires as soon as you brake that. It takes a while for them to come back. So I try to be pretty progressive in how I release the brake pedal as I turn the car in. And I've found that was what I learned really watching Nick, was I would watch his brake lights, and his brake lights would be on well past the part of the corner that he turned in, or well past the turning point for the corner. But you could tell that it was kind of like a really gradual release, and as he got the car leaned into the corner, he was coming off the pedal, and he would almost get straight back onto the throttle really progressively. So that's where I was talking about really using the pedals as pitch control to balance the weight of the car through the corner, as well as speed control, and not relying quite so much on the steering wheel to control the weight, but using the steering wheel to point the car where you want and set the weight where you want with the pedals.
Yeah, that's something you just made me remember, that I rode with James Darden last event. He jumped in the Porsche with us, and instantly I was like, are you left foot braking? He goes, yes. I go, I could totally tell how he would turn in and almost hold the wheel at that position and then set the arc with the brake or gas on whatever angle he turned the wheel in on. I'm trying to make it seem like he was a statue. He wasn't quite. We broke down the video and we actually uploaded to YouTube for people to look at with 4 of us. But still, he was so consistent. He would turn in, and then you could feel him playing with the, I'm going to brake a little bit. It's going to suck in. I'm going to add a little gas. It's going to go a little bit wider. That's what I feel like you're talking about. He was controlling the weight and momentum to the outside, like you're saying, all on how much he was going to apply some more braking or some gas or mix those together.
That's very interesting. I've actually gotten the feedback over a couple of years that it seems like I always know the exact angle to turn the wheel to, or I have so few inputs that it makes me so smooth. And we've both identified that as the same thing with James and but you, I think, identified it right, that there's a lot more going on with our feet maybe to make up for the fact that we're not constantly adjusting the wheel, where other people may be constantly adjusting the wheel, but their feet aren't really that active. And I'm sure you get the same effect one way or the other. It's just what you're used to.
Yeah, I could totally even feel the difference, just that he was blending them together so well because he left foot brakes. I was like, you're a left foot braker? Like, I should know this. Although I'm not sure I've ever ridden with him in the 15-something years I've been here locally with him. I was like, wow, yeah, I could totally feel the difference there, how you were back and forth to get that arc just how I wanted it. And I've always heard John Ames do the same thing. He just turns in perfectly, and he holds the wheel right there. And what it reminds me is the first Pro Solo I ever did, it was out in Utah. Oh, I hope we can get that site back. That was so much fun. And there's a bunch of offsets, but not very much offsets, just a little bit. And I totally lifted to slow down a little bit because I knew I was getting offline. And the car sucked in like a few feet. And that's like the largest example I can give somebody. If you're in a big sweeper or a larger offset and you're holding the wheel or you put your input in and you'll just lift and slow down just a little bit and you'll actually notice the car tightening the line. I bet you're doing that all the time, and that's what people are saying. You're just turning in, and you're making those fine adjustments by lifting a little bit or applying more or a little bit less throttle.
Sure. Yeah, that was actually a big epiphany for me. I used to, like I said, I didn't really have a game plan for runs. I also would try to keep full throttle as long as possible, as much as possible. Like, I was stubbornly convinced that every slalom in the entire world should be flat out, and I would try to make it stick no matter what. And a big learning point or turning point in my driving style was when I learned to not be so stubborn with I want to be flat through that and really pedal the car, or use the pedal the car meaning speed, control the pedals to the point that I'm having the car on the limit but not just overdriving the crap out of the car.
I'm in a Civic at altitude. I have also sworn that every single slalom is flat out.
That would be the ideal world, wouldn't it?
Yeah. And then John Ames goes, that's not true. What if it's a 10-cone slalom? Okay, I get it. But
fine.
Anything over 20 paces, I'm like, this is pretty flat. And that's where, as a course designer, I'm not sure if you've done that, I'm always thinking, okay, if we make this too big, the people in the ST Civics and Miatas, they're bored.
Sure. Oh, yeah, totally. Actually, I think my course design, I get pretty polarizing reviews of my course designs, because I tend to put maybe a little too much in them. Not in that they're too slow, but in that there's never really straight, like there's just always something to plan ahead for more, I would say. I'm sure if people are listening to this and they drove my tour course last year, especially my local event courses, they're like, everybody's like, this is so hard. I'm like, well, it's not supposed to be easy, but I would probably put too much in because I'm thinking like, okay, this is a CRX and I'm going to have plenty of time to do whatever I want in a CRX or a Miata or insert car here. And the guys in the Corvettes or bigger cars or Mustangs, especially Camaros, like, this is too much.
That reminds me, I think of the word busy. Kevin Younger designed that course on the west side maybe 3 years ago now that was so busy that you would never think somebody driving an F-stock Mustang would ever do that. Mm-hmm. Just busy, transition. I like that. I like it when I finish the course, I go, oh my goodness, I was just busy the whole time.
Exactly. Was that the same year that Strano did the other course?
They were it was somebody that had a big sweeper course, and you would have thought it would have been the opposite.
Yeah, I thought it was it
Hollis.
Sam did.
Andy Hollis, I think, had the one with the big sweepers in the middle. I could be confusing the years here, but it was totally opposite. You would think, okay, Kevin did the big open one, and Hollis or whoever did the tight one, and no, exactly opposite.
I'm pretty sure that was 13. That was the year that I was in the 914, and I really enjoyed Kevin's course, but I sucked at it relative to the other one.
And then you're like,
you're totally right. It's just like one of those where, and I love those courses where if you mess up one element, you pay for it for 4 more elements. I guess that's my course design style if I had to boil it down to one thing.
Oh, okay, so we can lobby you to get in there as long as I'm not in a Corvette or Camaro. I got it.
Exactly right. Yeah.
Nationals. Tom O for Nationals course design. As long as I'm in a small, maybe an A mod, something nice and small.
I would love to do that.
I'm not brave enough to think I'd want to do that. I don't know. Maybe I should lobby for the pro solo courses. This last year was great. I love that.
There you go. Yeah, I actually lucked out. I've only done one Nationals course or National Tour course, and it was the same course. I couldn't actually. I did end up getting to drive it, but it was the same weekend as my Pirelli World Challenge first race ever last year. So I designed the course ahead of time, but then everybody else set it up for me, and it got pretty tweaked through the interpretation of what I had on paper to what it was supposed to be to what ended up being on the course, if that makes sense. So I had a perfectly built-in excuse of if people didn't like it, well, that's not what I wanted either.
Exactly. Like, that's not what I drew. They made me change
Right.
it. The surface is wrong over there.
So if I do nationals courses next year, I'll just make sure to be off it somewhere else. So if people hate it, it's not my fault.
But like Kinch changed that. I don't know why he couldn't count the grids. I mean, look, they're on squares.
Exactly.
So you said something again about when you first started, you drove everything too hard or everything flat out. Take us back to how you, let's say, it sounds like you were very aggressive to begin with. And I think people should always know, are they too aggressive or not aggressive enough, either all the time or in certain portions? Take us back to what you were when you began.
Yeah, so when I began, like you said, very aggressive, throw everything at the wall, see what sticks. I used to make quite a lot of mistakes and hit a lot of cones. But I was always so aggressive that I was still quick on most days. And especially as I started instructing and kind of honing what I was doing, I've really settled into the last couple of years. My strategy going into any event is the first run needs to have zero mistakes, and it really starts with the course walk, deciding where I want the car to be on the course walk, and executing that first run with absolutely no mistakes, regardless of how fast I need to drive. So I generally now start slower and pick up time. And then identifying just whatever the low-hanging fruit is. If there was a mistake on the run, fix that. And then if there wasn't, figure out where I can add speed on the consecutive runs. But my first run now is always, it's just hit the marks that I want to hit from the course walk. Don't worry about driving fast, but drive the car within the known limits of the car, which may sound crazy because I'm always driving different cars, but especially if you're driving your own car where you have a general idea of where the known limits are. If you're driving within those known limits as fast as you can without pushing the limits of the dynamics of the car and just focused on get a clean run in, then you build on that, then you're setting yourself up for success to get quicker and quicker on every run.
Yeah, with less pressure too. If that first one is either no mistakes or no cones, you've got a time in the books.
Oh yeah, huge.
So
autocross is so mental that way.
Yeah. I'm figuring it out, hopefully. So tell us with the walk in the course, how many times you're walking? Is every course walk the same? What are you mentally making note of?
3 or less. No more than 3 ever now, walks. And I really try to exaggerate. I walk the course as if I'm sitting in the car, so I leave more space on my right and try to walk an exaggerated line of what I'd be driving, where my butt would be in the seat as if I'm driving the course. I'm trying to look ahead and identify those exit points of corners. So I'm trying to start to paint the picture in my mind so it's ingrained of not only where my body's going to be, but where my head is looking. And like I said, 3 times or less, because there is that level of wanting to react to what's happening in the course in the moment, without having it too memorized.
I can totally relate, and that's where the people that have it all memorized, I've done that, and I guess I should do that at one of these winter series, really memorize the course and just see, can I still make sure I look ahead?
I guess I don't really know why I settled into the 3 or less, but I've been doing that for the last 3 or 4 years and had success with that, so it's just like my strategy now. I also think it relates back to the video games, tying it all together, that I learn quickly and memorize quickly because I tried so many different things. And once you get into the PC games, you can have 1,000 tracks in the game, so there's no possible way to drive them all, but I tried anyway. And you just learning the course quickly, I would say that I do actually memorize the course within those 3 walks pretty easily. So I've done events where I don't walk the course and still had success that way, but 3 is generally what I need to really have a memorization of the course.
And so memorization, is this where you can get a piece of paper and kind of draw out where it goes and then probably star several places that are key, either cones or key exits?
I don't do that, but I say that I could. Or yeah. I would say that I could, yes.
I guess I've only ever done that at a pro solo where you don't have a map. I'd be like, oh, do I really know what the heck we're doing tomorrow? Mm-hmm. And I would take the time to do that. But I just that's the kind of level I'm trying to think people to think of if they're walking the course a whole bunch. What are they really? What should they retain from that? And for me, it's always like if something looks different to me, or there's some kind of gotcha that that doesn't look familiar. Those are like a key cone to me, as much as it is an exit to get into the next slalom, or hey, this exit I have to be on the inside of the cone for the slalom. That's kind of like for me the couple of key things I always look for.
Yep, definitely. And I always, I guess I would boil it down to say you should be able to drive a rough mental lap of the track or run, a rough mental run. And if you can't, walk it again. So if you can do that after one, you probably don't need to walk it again. But as long as you're walking to the point that you can identify those gotcha cones or those key points and draw or run, a rough mental through of the course, probably good.
Yeah, you probably have it figured out. And then you can go walk with other people and talk the whole time.
Yeah, and I generally do that anyway, too. It's 3 social walks maybe equals 1 serious business walk, maybe.
I was thinking you don't walk as much because you're getting older, okay? It just happens.
It's true, yeah. My knees are killing me.
Oh, my goodness.
Don't say we aren't athletes.
Yeah, exactly. We're training. That's what hearing Brian Highcutter or reading – he's like, I'd never worked out before, but I realized I need to work out for this stuff. It actually, there's benefits. And on that part of this, for nationals, I found if you go for the pro solo finale and you're there for 7 or 8 days, oh my goodness, it's just like, can you stay hydrated? Can you have some electrolytes? Mm-hmm. Because wowzer, one time I did that and I was just spent. I'm like, I get to drive at nationals now.
Yep.
I mean, I even practiced by standing outside quite a bit during the week, and still not really up for that 9 days in a row.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a lot, especially if you get into the social goings on. It can catch up to you pretty quick.
Yeah, and I've not tried the socials going on. Used to, I was so good at being slightly hungover and definitely sleep deprived. Because all of a sudden, at least for me, I'd realized I couldn't confuse myself. You just get in the car and drive. Mm-hmm. I probably didn't walk a lot because I don't feel good enough to walk a lot.
Right, yeah. Exactly.
I'm just nice and clear. So you mentioned about looking into long or straighter elements that you could see through being faster. Break down your thoughts on a slalom in autocross. Are you looking more than one cone ahead? What are you doing there?
I try to look to the last cone, and maybe not necessarily. I don't necessarily say that I'm looking specifically to the last cone, but I try to look through the entire slalom, even past the last cone. I always apply the same concept of powering out of the element, getting to the next thing as fast as possible. And I found that the general rule is if you can set yourself up to power past the last 2 cones, whether it's a 3 or a 10 cone slalom, that's kind of the fastest way to do it. So I really try to control my speed. Same thing, braking a little bit early, having my speed set by the time I get to that first cone. And I generally do a pretty exaggerated backside of the first cone. Another thing that was interesting driving with John and Craig earlier this year was both of them would really attack the slalom and kind of drive past the first cone, pitch the car hard into the slalom, and try to pedal a little bit through the middle of it and then power back out. So they were fast in, slow in the middle, fast out, and I really try to build gradually through. So my entry speeds were lower and more controlled, and I was feeding throttle. Also tying back to using the pedals as pitch control. If you're consistently on the pedal with one input and gradually accelerating through a slalom, you can ask a ton of the car from the wheel because the car is perfectly planted in neutral in a steady state acceleration, and it's not really doing a whole lot, so you can pitch the car side to side really quickly. Versus if you're doing a lot with the pedals, you're constantly changing the weight forward, backward, and side to side, and the car really doesn't like that. So I always try to get my speed set in, backside the first cone hard, set my pedal to be a steady acceleration, and kind of be hanging on for dear life by the 4th and 5th cones, powering past them.
Yeah, and I like you nailed that exactly. I'm Craig Wilcox. I so often dive into the second cone. Can I brake at the second or third? But the way you just said that is so true that by the time I'm in there, I've already done 2 turns at 1 speed and without braking, and now I'm braking and trying to turn. For consistency, I don't think I would ever try to teach somebody to do that.
Exactly. I think it definitely boils down to repeatability, consistency, because you can definitely make that work, and you can throw in a Hail Mary and it's going to be fast for sure. But the risk factor of throwing it in, I mean, that's like a third run, I've got to win at Nationals type move where you got nothing to lose. Whereas if you're working on improving things, consistency is going to say the lower risk move.
Yeah, especially on the 3-run format. And you're making me hit on something I'm wondering why in pro solos I've been more successful there, because you get 6 Hail Marys on each side.
Yeah, maybe.
Basically, you can eventually, I figured that out and it worked this time.
Right.
So that's so interesting hearing you say that. I'm tying you back to Brian Peters. And he was like, I knew I should have said I'd never break going into a slalom, but he probably doesn't. You probably don't dive past that first cone, and then you're being, like you're saying, consistent. You're braking. You're trying to get, if anything, you'd like to have your speed optimal going into it and not diving in extra fast. Just can it be optimal, and can you accelerate out? And I would say I always think I'm going to get later and later in the slalom where I'm as late as I can be on the last cone without having to change my input.
Exactly.
Yeah, so you early apex the first one, or you get right next to it on the entry. I think that is so huge, especially for anybody, any beginner by far. They'll just drive past the first cone and then go, oh, now I'm going to turn across.
Yep, and that's where you're reacting to each cone as it comes in front of you, and that's why I try to break that and push my eyes through the entire slalom so I get a full mental picture of how big it is, how much space I've got. And like I said, exaggerating that first backside. When I'm teaching, we always, swap seats and drive the car for one run through, and I go pretty slow and really exaggerate the line. I'm like, look, this first move is a big input, but watch what happens as we go through, and each input gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and by the end I'm going straight. And if you flip that and you go straight in, each input gets bigger, bigger, bigger. It's harder to keep that speed up. So if you're at the lowest speed with the biggest input at the beginning, generally that means you can be much faster on the other end.
That was gold the way you just described that. You making bigger inputs is a bigger arc or a more of a radius, and it's getting less and less. And I'm kind of repeating this because it took me forever to know what a late apex was. Mm-hmm. I mean, I raced probably 5-6 years before I truly got what you're talking about, or what people always said. And he just described, you're almost driving straight at the end of the slalom. That's what I mean when I'm saying I'm getting later and later. It's getting less and less of an arc because I'm no longer setting up to get around that last slalom cone.
Mm-hmm.
That's good gold right there. Thank you. So with your eyes looking ahead, do you think you scan by looking up and coming back to something near you and then looking up again?
Yes, definitely.
And I bring this up for people listening because I rode with somebody. We went to a 180. I said, look across. She looked across and never once checked up to where we were going.
Yep.
In between, and it was a pretty big 180. And I am quite often, I notice when cones are not quite in the box, and that tells me I'm scanning. So I look ahead, and then I adjust back to where am I really at on this cone I'm about to hit or go next to. Yep. Do you find yourself doing that?
Yeah, definitely. I'm definitely scanning, and I try to teach that too. I know people who can crank their head, look once, and stare it down. I don't have the trust. Like, I've tried to make myself learn to do that on off-ramps and stuff, the big cloverleaf off-ramps, and it's so uncomfortable for me to not have some concept of where I'm at. So I definitely scan around. Another thing that's very interesting that kind of ties in when you're strapped into a car road racing with a neck restraint on, a lot of them limit the amount you can turn your head. So in autocross, you have the luxury of cranking your head around, scanning and turning, out the side window. But in a road race car, you generally can't. You can kind of make it to the A pillar, and that's about it. So I've actually found it to be a little more comfortable to be in a head neck restraint where I can't turn my head because like I said, I struggle to turn my head and scan around.
Oh, interesting. So you're using your side mirrors, or how do you know somebody's next to you?
Yeah, most of them you use a lot more. A lot of them have convex mirrors in them, so you get a big convex mirror over where the factory rearview mirror would be, and you get convex mirrors on the side. Sometimes bolt them to the roll cage or something, and then you've got your peripheral up to about the side of you. So if you can cover the 180 degrees behind where your peripheral reaches, you're good. But sometimes cars disappear back there. It's a little scary.
Wow. No, that's where playing the video game last night. I'm like, oh, I can look in that little mirror right there and see that somebody's coming up on me. Okay, bam. Okay, they did hit me.
A lot of the video games now have the little flasher that'll like, you got a car on your right or your left or something, like a lane.
Oh, true.
Like
yep.
a lane changing thing.
True.
That was really nice to have in a real car. But.
Yeah, Forza had little orange that turned gray or something. Once again, I've done 4 races, so I don't really know. But yes, it would point and show you the angle. But that's all cheating. Yeah, we should turn that off so we have to be more realistic. Make it real. Make it real scary. Ay, ay, ay. No, that's very interesting that you. It's much more like a video game. You can't even look. You can't turn your head. Of course, you would, unless you had screens all the way to our left and right. We would never be able to do that. But I am notorious for turning my head. I was thinking about the videos we just made the video for YouTube. I'm looking way to the left. Sometimes I was looking to see if a course worker is running to get a cone. I mean, bad habits, but yeah. And I noticed certain people, it looks like their head's like out of the driver's window. They're like, hey, I got to go over there.
I think that's like my favorite thing to see is the people who drive with their shoulders and their whole head is cranked out the window or down in the center console. Like, how can you even see? But yeah, I'm the opposite of that, where I'm not great at that. So that's why I scan, because it's not comfortable for me to have my head turned out the side window. So I look quick and then I come back.
Okay. No, that's very interesting. Oh, have you ever done F125 autocross wise?
I haven't, no. Closest thing would be CMOD.
Okay, what was that like?
I loved it. It felt actually very natural. And the vision thing was very nice, having just nothing in your way. The most interesting thing is with small cars like that, open wheel cars, Formula cars, and you're used to a big car, the weight transfer is so much less. So transitionally, like an open wheel car is not really designed to slalom. So transitionally, there's almost no weight transfer. So you've got to drive the car very differently through a slalom. You can't pitch it nearly as much because there's nothing to there's no progression between like the weight transfer. It's just like boom, 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 boom. So it can get behind and snappy. Sweepers, it's awesome because they're designed for that. They're all designed for road courses. But it was very interesting to adapt to slaloming and making a car like that transition quickly.
Yeah, fascinating. I've never been in one, and that makes total sense. They were not designed to go boom, boom, left, right, left, right. That's right. Why would you do that?
Road courses. None of that. We're used to like my first couple autocrosses were like H stock and the soft Civics that drag the door handles, and you're obviously the Integra dragging door handles. You've got all the time in the world from when it settles to one side to the other, so you can make these big, huge inputs because you've got to, and a car flops from one side and then it flops to the other side, and the Formula cars are just like there's none of that big transition period. It's just one side to the other to the other to the other. So you can actually be a little slower with your hands because if you go too quick, they get overwhelmed. Yeah,
that's why Barriott got in my Integra, I guess a winter series out of CMOD. And I was like, rode with him. And once again, I think it is good. And I need to do more riding with other people. He made, I think, all the same inputs I did, but he made miniature inputs. Mm-hmm. Between the steering rack, the big wheel, and being from CMOD, he would move the car like a foot. And I was letting it move like 4 feet. Maybe I didn't need to, but all that setup and slosh, and it was hilarious how he was just little. I'm like, whoa, okay, Barry, no, you probably have to really give it an input to get it over there.
You can't ask it to do something. You got to tell it. Go over there.
Go over there. This is big and cushy. You got all the suspension stuff. So, Simon, what else stands out to you that you've driven?
Well, the Porsche 914-6 that I drove in 2013 and at Nationals this past year is the best car I've ever driven, hands down. But that's started life as a Porsche 914-6. It now has a 2.9 liter 911 engine in it. Big slicks, flares, stripped. It's an F prepared car. I'm sure many people have seen it between when Greg Fordall and Leeds Gulick were running it in the Northwest, and then now Dave Montgomery has it. That's just the most fantastic car I've ever driven. As soon as my butt hit that seat, I understood what that car was doing. Especially in 2013, we ran it on bias plies, so it could take these huge slip angles, and everything was super progressive and predictable. But you drove it on the edge, and from the outside, it looks completely insane on course. But from the inside, it just feels like $1 million. So I absolutely adore that car.
So break this down. That's a rear engine car?
Yeah. No, mid-engine car.
Okay.
I would say in general, most of my favorite cars are mid-engined. I was lucky enough to drive Matt Glagola's SSM Elise, and that car was pretty incredible. Pretty much anytime I get in anything mid-engined, I really enjoy that. Like I said, I really like a car that turns in hard. Most mid-engine cars, if you get the nose, the weight on the nose and you're off throttle and you turn in, they transition hard because they're slinging the weight around from the back. And then you catch it with the throttle. So I really like that driving style. I also always love BMW M3s, E36s specifically. I don't know why, but I just love those cars. I've got a soft spot for all the STS, CRX Civics. Those are just, they kind of break the rules of physics for me. They shouldn't be able to do what they do and go as fast as they do, but they can.
That makes me want to get you in a GT4. Can it really compete? Get you in there in Super Street?
Yeah, they look amazing. I would drive one in a heartbeat.
That, and we could get you in a CSP Civic to see if it can compete with a Miata. We just need to put you in. Well, that's where I think, watching those CSP Miatas.
Yeah, there's no way.
Yeah, just insane. I'm like, for the money, if you could keep one running, that to me would probably be like, wow, I cannot believe it can go this fast, and just the grip level.
Yep. One of my favorite people to watch is Billy Davis because it's just unbelievable how fast. I mean, he raw timed me at Nationals this year, and I was in F prepared, and he's in CSP. That shouldn't happen. Like, the laws of classing say that doesn't happen, but it happens because, and I think he beat BSP and I think he beat DP, and like,
yeah,
this is just insane.
Yeah, the laws of physics say yes, that car probably weighs 1,900 pounds, but what's it got, 150 horsepower? So I don't know what, they don't have a ton of power, right?
Yeah, something in there.
Yeah, and that's where I've got to re-hit on what James Yam made me aware of, that just a bad assumption. I told myself that a Super Street GT3, that it's faster than my Civic and everything. And he's like, no. Physics say that car weighs so much more that the transition elements and sweepers, not necessarily. So I had the bad habit. I got in the GT3 and just tried to go faster everywhere. And then
it can't.
Yeah, and it's just so silly of me to think that, oh no, just because it's so powerful that it's going to do this. And then I started thinking, wait, the front tires, I have 225s or 195s, somewhere in that range. That car doesn't have twice as much up front. Mm-hmm. It finally starts hitting me like, oh yeah, I have 4 degrees of negative camber. That car doesn't. So just for everybody out there, don't make these assumptions when you hop from one car to another. You really have to do what Tom's doing. He's figuring out what the limit is and not exceeding it. Whereas I was stubborn and just kept going, no, it can do this. It has to be faster than I would usually be in a Civic. Not always true. So that's very interesting. M3, so you just described once again, you like lots of different cars. You've been successful in lots of different cars. I guess it just credits back to you are truly paying attention with feel, vision, where the maximum grip is in each car you get in.
Yeah, I guess it's, like I said, it kind of ties back to the only logical thing I can relate it to is the video games jumping from thing to thing as quick as my 9-year-old brain would let me stay focused on things. And like I said, been lucky enough to drive so many different things, and also starting to instruct so early on. You always drive the students' cars at autocross schools because that's really the best way. You do a combination of instructing from the right seat and demonstrating from the driver's seat, and the combination of everything has made it that when I get to try different cars and get experience in different cars, you tie all of those together and learn what different styles of cars are going to like, and have had good luck with that.
Yeah, true. You're not coming in blind. You've driven lots of different cars, sat in lots of different cars, and it's funny to hear you describe all the cars you like. You did include the CRXs and Civics, but you're in World Rally driving a Fit. So you're front-wheel drive out there killing it in a front-wheel drive car, not a mid-engine rear-wheel drive car.
Yeah, it is funny, actually. So I did basically nothing but Civics and CRXs in 2010 through 2012. So it was always either a CRX or a Civic, and it was just for every event I had co-drives in those kinds of cars. And then 13 came around, and I was driving the 914, and then I was driving a B stock fixed roof coupe Corvette. So that's the last year they were on Hoosiers. and I did a couple events in the Street Mod 240. So all of a sudden I'm in 3 cars on slicks with high horsepower and kind of different drivetrains. But from that year on, it's been high horsepower, slicks, modified cars, things like that. So I even forget that I've driven a lot of front wheel drive cars, low horsepower. But my roots are really in that. So driving now the Fit in Pirelli World Challenge, it's relearning or reapplying all of those things that you learn in autocross, where there's actually a lot more throttle modulation going on in the World Challenge Fit than there is even, I would say, back to the Corvette. The Corvette was just, you pin it in the middle of the corner. It was underpowered with over tires, or over-tired. I could do whatever I wanted in that car versus these maybe less than optimal, front-wheel drive cars with open diffs, and they've got grip, but it's a bigger challenge to drive those cars because they're maybe not designed to do what we're doing with them, so you've got to work with them a little bit.
Yeah, so that's interesting. You were actually, I think you just said you pay more attention to modulating the gas pedal in those.
Yeah. There's because especially in the World Challenge cars, like I said, it's a non-adjustable shock spring package. Basically, you buy the kit from Honda and you put it on the car, and that's the only performance modification you can do. You can't adjust anything at all. So they're tall. They have open diffs. They're pretty heavy. They've got the tires we run are 190s. So they're itty-bitty little bicycle tires, but they're slicks, so they've got a ton of grip. And so they pick up the inside fronts, and they roll a lot, and they'll pitch and roll. So there's a lot of you can't just pin it to the floor because you run the front tires off the car, and especially over the long races, you can really overheat the tires, and so there's also tire management going on. And if you're meat-headed about it, you can get away with a qualifying lap, but it's not going to work over a long time. So you really have to learn where the limit of throttle modulation is and work with that.
Wow. So you just said you're lifting a front tire and it's an open diff.
Well, unweighting the front tire.
Oh, enough that it's going to be like an open diff that's not putting down power.
Exactly.
And it's probably heating that tire up because it's spinning it more.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, wow. So would you ever adjust your line to put down power, like make it flatter coming out?
Yeah. I'm trying to think of a corner where there's a good example of that. At Mid-Ohio, I guess, it's my home track, there's a right-hander that is at the apex, just past the apex. It's a pretty early apex corner, and as you straighten the wheel coming out, you crest a hill, and no matter what you're in, you're getting the car light there. And with the B-Spec cars, if you are not exactly on line and you crest that point, the entire drivetrain goes and you pull the car, it pulls you a foot off or 3 feet off your line. So you have to turn in even earlier, get a little more rotation done, and get the wheel a little more straight over that, which is the case for most cars over that corner. But people think our cars are going so slow you can get away with whatever you want through there. Well, no, it's actually just as exaggerated in our car as it is in most.
Wow. Yeah, good point. That once again, depending on what your setup is, what car you're put in, if you can have setup, you may have to change things and or be very gentle for different reasons from Corvette to Civic.
Yep. And the other big thing is if you can learn to drive momentum cars, you're going to be quick in anything, and it's not necessarily the other way around. If you're quick in a high-power car where you get to make mistakes and get away with it because you've got all the power in the world to make up for it, if you get in a slow car, it's not going to work, and you're most likely going to have to make a bunch of adjustments to get quick.
Oh, very interesting. That makes me think, do you ever get in a car and think point and shoot?
Definitely. Actually, the 914 is very point and shoot because it's very high-powered, mid-engined. It really, steady state is not its happy spot, so a big sweeper. It's not great in a big sweeper, but it transitions and points so well. You really point and shoot it. All-wheel drive cars, point and shoot for sure. But only to an extent, I would say. Actually, there was a point after 2013, at the beginning of 2014, after driving all those high horsepower cars on slicks, I drove an Elise, which is not really a slow car, but it's a slow car relative to what I was driving, and I was garbage at it. I could not remember how to drive a momentum car to save my life because I'd been driving these higher horsepower cars and slowly, forgetting how to drive a momentum car. And by the time I got back in a momentum car, I was like, oh God, I forget how to do this. So now I'm lucky with the B-Spec car, at least I get that reminder of momentum all the time.
So that's where maybe your course walk should probably actually change your driving line based on which car you're in. Maybe exaggerate it to say, hey, I've got to really set up more or set up less depending on the car.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's good points. And that's something I've not brought up before, but I used to follow people around doing course walks, David Falf, John Ames. If you don't know what car they're driving, maybe they would dare change their line. Maybe you should really try to follow someone fast in a car similar to yours, even better if they drive like you do.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. That's a good point. And also understanding that, just because you're in an all-wheel drive car that you're going to point and shoot, you're still hitting the same mark on the corner exit, but how you get to that might just be different. So if you're still hitting the same mark on a front-wheel drive car where you're carrying speed, you're getting to that point, but you've been on throttle for a long time. Where a high horsepower Evo on slicks, you might get there differently, be on power later, and you're pointed a different direction when you get to that point, but you're still hitting that same mark.
That's a great point. So there are places on every course that you want to be in a certain spot or a certain mark you do want to hit, and often it's the exits of one feature, thus the entry of another.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
I like that. More gold, more good tape right there. So what other favorite cars or a favorite car you have not gotten to drive yet that you'd like to drive?
I would love to experience an A-Mod car, just to see what that's like, especially somebody, what's his name? Marshall Grice was basically at the top of PAX this year at Nationals in an A-Mod car. And we're used to looking at PAX index numbers as maybe 10 to 12 seconds faster than the car that we're driving after you index that number. And I want to be able to wrap my head around what it feels like to drive that 10 to 12 seconds faster through the course and just not have the time indexed. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I am indexed.
I would love to experience that. I love like ESP CP cars, just watching them. I love the idea of them, just like these huge ground pounders that are doing the complete wrong thing for what they were intended for, but being fast doing it anyway. Those types of things crack me up. I love watching that stuff.
I wish I was brave enough to say I want to get in one of those. I need to do F stock first or F Street.
I actually did get a chance to do some. Actually, this is also funny. Another one that I always enjoy when I get into is anything 05 and newer Mustang. That generation Mustang 05 and newer. I always love those cars. And I've driven one I did a pro with Ron Bistreas out of the New Jersey area. And it was a ton of fun. It's just a Shelby on slicks. Awesome.
I have heard good things about at least a newer one. Several people have said you've got to get in one if you have a chance. They said they copied an M3, so you did say you like the E36 M3s. I don't know how similar they can be, but I've heard that they are very well set up and balanced.
They are very balanced, yep.
That it just boggles my mind. I'm like, really? Because I drove, what was it, about 2011 M3 and ST, and I got out saying, wow, this car is soft. And Mark was like, oh, great, nice to say. I'm like, I could not believe how soft your car was. I did 5 runs in the GT3, and I got in that, and I'm like, you're an ST. Isn't this supposed to be nice and stiff? Like, I was just like, I thought I was an F Street. Really, I could not believe how much it rolled. And although it was forgiving when it would break away with the gas pedal, I was like, oh, I could catch that pretty easy.
Exactly.
You just mentioned Pro Solos. What are your thoughts on Pro Solos?
I think all autocross should be Pro Solos. I think it's a ton of fun. The intensity of having 2 cars side by side and like rolling to the grid, especially in the challenges, I just absolutely like. I get a huge kick out of it. I love it. Tomo
for president, because I'm backing you up there, buddy. If we could have all Pro Solos, I mean that's why I drive across the country. I hope that more of you get addicted somewhat, and somewhat I don't, because we hit our numbers at different places, and we can't have more of you. But I kick myself for having raced for 5 or 6 years before trying one. And then, even though I went to one and did well, I went to like one a year, and then I saw oh wait, you can win a championship and drive at nationals before nationals. Mm-hmm. It was just like, once again, wake up, pay attention, see what's going on out there. I had no clue, and I will spend many more hours in the truck or the car driving across the country because I know I get 12 runs at a minimum. And if you make the challenge, you get another whole experience, a whole new mental game. I can compete against people not in my class. I mean, it's just so much different, and there's so much more to it.
Yeah, and the challenges, especially. I guess after 2013, it was kind of like mentally, okay, I've done. I won my first championship that year. I won the Pro Championship that year, and I won Driver of the Year that year. It's like, okay, I've gone as far as I'm going to go with autocross. Let's try road racing. This is where I really want to be anyway. But my bucket list of things to achieve in motorsports, winning a pro challenge is still like close to the top, if not at the top, because it's something that's always eluded me. Even just doing well in challenges, I haven't ever really done well consistently in those challenges, but it's something that I want to do so badly because I love that aspect of that format.
Here's the free advice I was given. It's all about consistency. Mm-hmm. So maybe I've said this before. David Fowle sends me the email. Why did you win by 1.8 seconds? And I go, what do you mean? I'm like, that's how fast I drove. And he pointed out to me that the reply was something like, have you ever heard of sandbagging? I'm like, no, really, what are you talking about? And he goes, the pros are all about consistency in the challenge. And the light bulb went off. I was achieving things to get to the challenge that I couldn't necessarily repeat. There was no consistency there.
Yep.
And yet then I found every single way to knock myself out of the challenge. So I swear some people it takes a lot of challenges, some it doesn't. But that consistency, which I take your driving style and what you've done hopping in all these cars, that should almost be your natural state or something that should make it easier for you because you are so consistent. I could see as long as you think of that and just say, I'm going to do the same thing I've already done and not what I did. Like, I'm going to go faster in the challenge. Well, guess what, goofball? You probably can't. You're going to overdrive and go slower.
Yep.
So that's...
Yep. I would say that you're right. I should. and I haven't somehow yet. The best I've ever done was third. And I actually had a really good shot. That was the best event maybe that I've ever had. It was a Blytheville Pro. Somehow that course just clicked in my brain, and I had STS covered by seconds if I needed it. It was just like I was so far checked out on the rest of the class, so I basically stopped going quicker and knew that I had this for the challenge set up. But it was the same year that Andy Hollis was running his Mazda 2 in STF as the first year in STF, and I got to the Final Four and got him, and he had more sand than I did. And that was the best I've ever done. I finished third that year. He won the challenge, so at least I lost to the guy that won, right?
Yes, that's happened a few times. I credit myself like, okay, they were the best.
Yep.
Yeah, that's the thing is you go
root for the guy that knocks you out, right?
Yeah, but yeah, sometimes in certain classes, I'm always like, man, I should get a car for that class because then I get an ST, and I don't know if one or two pros in all these tries has been where it hasn't been just so much competition you're scraping to even make it.
Right.
So that's where I am amazed sometimes. You mentioned Nick Barbado. He just drives flat out in my mind. The year that he won the overall, which is one of my things I really want to do, I ended up second, but I came into that with a first and a second in challenges, only to realize he had won two already. Uh-huh. I'm like, who is this guy? He's got two of these cool hats. So winning the challenge does take quite a bit of fun, a bunch of luck there at times, even to get through the rounds.
Yeah, I'm kind of a first round hero. I don't know why I do it, but I haven't gotten there yet.
Oh, don't worry. Well, that's what's going to keep bringing you back, buddy. And that's nothing.
Exactly.
Why do you keep coming back to autocross?
I just love it, man. I don't know exactly why. There's nothing like the feeling after a good autocross run. I know it's a good run because I can't control my shaking after the run. And if I hold my hands out and I can't control the shakes, I know it was a good run. And I've only experienced that once since I started road racing or driving on tracks. And the only time that I experienced that was my very first pro win in Pro Early World Challenge. And you can't repeat your very first pro win, but I can repeat good autocross runs and get that high of that. Plus, at this point now, my network of friends is so rooted in autocross. Going to autocrosses feels like vacation. So I've actually found that my performance improves at autocrosses because I just go and have fun and enjoy seeing people. And oh, by the way, I drive. And my attitude is so I'm enjoying this moment type mindset that driving well just comes kind of naturally because I'm having a good time.
Yeah. No, thank you. Let me know if you have any other thoughts. Otherwise, definitely let us know where we reach out to you, where we keep up with what you're doing.
Sure, definitely. So I try to post as much as possible on Facebook at Tomo Racing is the new page there. Trying to keep everything in one place. And then also on Instagram at Tomo Racing. My website is tomoracing.com. So this year we won the TCB Championship and Pirelli World Challenge, which was really exciting to win that overall title the first year in pro racing. And looking forward to next year, it sounds like I'll be growing with Honda and Pirelli World Challenge into faster and more exciting things.
Congrats. That is sweet. That's one thing I think that autocross won't understand compared to pro racing. Everybody's rooting for other people as well as seeing any of us that make it like you are out. It's just amazing. Oh, yeah. Like we all go, oh, wow, I get to race with this guy. He shows up on weekends with us.
Yeah, it's pretty overwhelming. Actually, it was funny. One guy I race with now in World Challenge was like, how do you have so many fans? I'm like, I don't have fans. I just have a ton of people that I've met through the years autocrossing, and now every single one of them is rooting for me, and I can't verbalize why other than that it's overwhelming and amazing feeling to have that many people. I mean, I come off of a race that gets live streamed, and there's 100+ notifications on my Facebook. And it's just like, that's so overwhelming and incredible that I can't even wrap my head around that, but I just am so appreciative for it.
That's a good point, because they can compare to the people you're racing with. They're like, whoa, you're an anomaly. What's different here?
Yeah, and it's just that I would legitimately say I don't think of it as I have a bunch of fans. Like, that's ridiculous. I just have a bunch of friends who I've autocrossed with over 10 years now, and they like to see what else I do, I guess.
Yeah, and that's where Facebook is very good with me. 90% of what it shows me is racing related. So yes, I see yours. I see what's going on there. Like, oh, I like that. That's nice. Mm-hmm. Their algorithm's very good. Like, you're a racing nut. Let me show you what else is going on with your other racing nut friends.
Oh yeah.
Oh, and that's where you mentioned Andy Hollis in the challenge. It sounds like he made it out to quite a few events with you for Pirelli World Challenge.
He did, yeah. Actually, the first race this year was at COTA in Austin. He lives there, so I didn't have anybody to help me and work on the car or anything. And I messaged him and asked him if he'd be willing to do it. And he, I think at first said, yeah, sure, I guess I will. And ended up like absolutely loving it. So he was like, let's do more of these. I'll come to more of them. So he came to 2 more of them through the year. And he was like just absolutely perfect to have around, because he was what we'd call the car chief. So he's responsible for making sure the car's ready for the races, and when we talk setup and we go through data. But because he's so experienced in all of that, it was like having another driver to bounce ideas off of, and he could help me digest things after the sessions. And he's been in racing for so long that he knows other people in the paddock, and they're like, Andy, what are you doing here? And they're like, they know each other, and so it was perfect to have him as the guy that was willing to help out.
Yeah, that's so neat to see that. And also I want everybody to realize, if you want to learn about these other types of racing, it sounds like people need help at these events. From what James said racing with you, he said that he has to be in a meeting while his car has to be moved somewhere else. Mm-hmm. It sounds like you almost need somebody there with you to make all the meetings you're doing, in addition to getting the car to different places, or even saying changing tires and such, or whatever else you're going to do.
Yeah, definitely. They're assuming that you have a crew of people there with you. So they don't consider the fact that if you have to have the car and tech and the driver in the driver's meeting, that's almost never the same person unless you're me and James. So I got some help this year. He gets help every once in a while, but sometimes we just, this year I had help at every race, so we would sign off for him, and then we just share the information around the paddock. But we're definitely the odd ones out with that. It's kind of cool, though. I mean, even to the point that there was a guy that just wanted to come see what it was about and sent me a Facebook message like the night before we got there and was like, hey, can I just come hang out tomorrow and watch and see? And he ended up not only like hanging out and seeing what everything was about, but helping turn some wrenches on the car. And he was really knowledgeable and really, really cool to meet. So it was like, yeah, you can just totally come out and hang out in our paddock.
Yeah, and basically you're getting to see some behind the scenes, probably things that otherwise you're not getting access to.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
it's pretty incredible to see that stuff from behind the scenes.
Yeah, I like that. I'm glad that you let us know and that you took the step there. You actually asked him, said, hey, would you come out here? You live here. So each of you that live somewhere where there's a World Challenge, see if somebody needs help. You could even ask somebody like James Wilson or Tom, sure. Does somebody else that races with you need a hand? You can show up and hang out and help. And then, hey, tell Andy he needs to be on the podcast.
All right, deal. Hey, Andy, get on here.
Get on it, buddy. Let us know how we set up these Civics.
He would be a great one to have, yeah.
Exactly. Some of these people need to come on for like 4 or 5 hours. We can break it up. They've been around long enough. They have so many stories.
Yep.
I've asked people like, oh, I don't have much to give them. Like, no, you do. You've been fast. You are fast, and you just have so much knowledge and for decades of experience. It boggles my mind. I want more and more of it on tape. So
yeah, you like break it down by the decade.
Yeah,
episode 4, episode 5.
So yeah, realize that people out there. So many people are so judgmental. Oh, I'm not fast anymore, or I'm not fast, or I don't know what I'd have to give. We all do. Yep. That's just the teammates' idea from the Whiteners. I'm like, no kidding, and having people. Scott Frazier's like, I have other people break down the data and come back to me. I'm like, there's so many little things from the different stories and people that help them and who they learned and how they learned from, how they learned the different techniques. It's all helpful and just to let us know how similar we are and how we might align with one person, what they say versus somebody else.
Absolutely.
Thanks again for the time. It was great.
Cool. Yeah, it was awesome. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for listening. For the show notes and contact information, please visit autocrosstalk.com. There you can also subscribe so that we can keep you up to date on new shows as they come out. Also, please leave us a review on iTunes and subscribe on iTunes for the upcoming shows. You can connect to our Facebook page at facebook.com/autocrosstalk. You can share your thoughts, your insights, your questions, your suggestions there. Also share with your friends. Hopefully you found it entertaining and motivating, and hopefully other people will as well. It's been fun, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for listening, and check back next week for the next show.